Welcome everybody to the Tom's Hardware Show. I'm Jared Walton, and today we are going to be talking about AMD's FidelityFX Super Resolution 2.0, which just launched today with Deathloop. Hey everybody, it's been a busy week. My cat's in the background. We've had AMD launch the 6950 XT, 6750 XT, and the 6650 XT on Tuesday. We did a special show on that with a review of the 6950 XT. I was going to talk about the ASUS 6750 XT today, but after testing AMD FidelityFX 2.0, Super Resolution 2.0, FSR 2.0, I decided to pivot and let's just talk about FSR 2.0. So I did test the 6750 XT. Review's not done yet. It's not live. Performance. So this is a bog standard reference 6700 XT. This is your Mamba Jamba overclocked ASUS ROG Strix card. And in practice, the ASUS card is like 5, 6, 7% faster. So I'm like, man, $50, $80, something like that increase. If you're talking about reference pricing, I guess it's $70. So the reference card's supposed to be $480. The reference 6750 is supposed to be $550. I'm not even sure what the ASUS card is. It's probably about $100, $150 over the reference price for 5 to 6% more performance. I honestly thought that the GPU memory overclocked, so it went from 16 gigabits to 18 gigabits per second GDDR6. I thought that would make a bigger difference, and apparently not. Binding performance was also slower, so I'm not sure what's going on with the memory, but that's all I'm going to say about that. We'll maybe talk about the 6750 and 6650 XT in more detail next week. You can probably see other reviews on them. They're not major increases. So the 6950 XT was 10% faster than the 6900 XT. Probably 5% of that was from having a heavily overclocked card and higher power limits. But instead, we're going to talk about FSR 2.0. So let's go ahead and pull up an image here. This is scaled, so I don't know what the quality is going to look like. You'll have to look at our article. You can check it out on Tom's Hardware. I'm going to go ahead and post that link in our comments quickly. But let's see. Hold on a second. There we go. So I'm going to post that link here in the comments, and you can see the full resolution images there with PNGs, so they're not artifacted. There's no compression, and they're at 100% magnification there, and you can, zoom or whatever you want to do. This, we've got 200% zoom just to try and show some of the differences, and I can flip through the unzoomed images in a second, but let me just say, this is a live stream, and I don't know what the compression algorithm is going to do, but you're probably not going to see nearly the difference that you would if you're actually looking at the images themselves. So native rendering in the top left, we've got temporal anti-aliasing enabled, and the default TAA sharpening factor is 5. I don't know if that's supposed to be 5% or just some number. It goes from 0 to 20. 5 is not sharp enough in my opinion. In fact, it looks horribly blurry. So this is with sharpening factor of 10. And that actually looked a lot better. At 20, I thought it was too sharp. Like you get some of that haloing that you see on edges when you apply a sharpen filter. So let's just start there. So that's native. FSR 1.0 in quality mode, mind you. So this is like, it's not their ultra quality mode, but it's their best quality, or it's a good quality mode supposedly. And this is 1080p upscaling. And like, look at the van and that, like the almost horizontal stripe going across it, like super jaggy, super, like it just doesn't look great. If you look at like the text where it says Charlie, Holland Quinn, or the side where it says Queen of Riddlers, it's all rather blurry and pixelated looking with FSR 1.0. Then you flip over to FSR 2.0 and DLSS. These are in performance mode. So this is their like lower quality, higher performance. And even there you can see that, there's a marked difference between FSR 1.0 and FSR 2.0 DLSS. And that's kind of the story here. So DLSS formerly, we said, yeah, it's definitely better quality than FSR. But performance gains weren't as big. I'll get to that in a little bit. And, it's like, well, at 1080p, I wouldn't use FSR 1 in anything other than ultra quality mode because the pixelation and shimmering and jaggies that you would see would, it just hurt. Let's see, someone comments, Sarah says, so stuttering and that weird jittering is gone on the FSR 2.0 while moving. I'm not sure if you're talking about stuttering like in terms of frame rates. That's more of a game problem usually. I never really saw stuttering from FSR, but I did see the shimmering or jittering, if that's what you mean, where like details would either get enhanced too much and then frame to frame variations, they wouldn't show up as much. And so you'd get like lines, vertical lines, horizontal lines that were high contrast would shimmer, not vertical and horizontal, I should say diagonal, especially because there you'd have jaggies that showed up. So I wouldn't say they're entirely gone, but if you're not super picky, it definitely looks a lot better. I got my friend Paul. He wants to join me. Should we say hi to Paul?
Hello.
Hi, Paul. Welcome to the show.
Well,
We're talking about FidelityFX Super Resolution 2.0.
Excellent. Tell me your impressions of FSR 2.0.
Yes. So, I mean, here's the caveat. How many games support FSR 2.0?
One. Deathloop.
Yeah, one. Deathloop. And it's an AMD promoted game. So AMD gave us pre-release access to this, let us test it for a few days. And I will say also, Deathloop probably had the worst implementation of FSR 1.0 in terms of quality. It was really bad. I mean, like Back 4 Blood, FSR looks okay in that, especially at quality, ultra quality modes. In Deathloop, I never thought it looked good. So that's an important caveat. But FSR 2.0, it takes all the wrongs that I saw with FSR 1.0 in Deathloop and basically fixes them. And now this is a still image.
That looks pretty good.
Yeah, like this is a still image. So I'm sitting there and I'm taking a screenshot and then I've scaled it by 200%. And that's like the best case scenario for upscaling, especially temporal upscaling, because it can take in previous frame information and show that or combine that. And it's like, well, frame to frame, it's not changing much. They do like a dithering pattern or a randomized pattern so that frame to frame, they can get more samples, more information. And with temporal upscaling, it ends up looking really good. So DLSS performance and FSR 2.0 performance, honestly, in some cases, they almost look better than the native rendering just because they do take more samples and combine it all together, and you're not moving in this case. In motion, I would say it's a little tighter or a little harder to compare. There's some things where I definitely noticed, like if you've played Deathloop, there are turrets, and they have like little blue lines or green lines shooting out from them that shows where their camera is pointing. And those lines looked very aliased in some of the upscaling modes, like because the lines don't stand still, so they're moving around a lot, and I guess the temporal algorithm wasn't able to combine them and smooth them out as much. So there are situations where it's not perfect and native looks better. But in practice, I'm like, yeah, why wouldn't I want this in my game? Because, as we'll see in a moment, performance gets way better. Let's go ahead and
you get a great performance boost out of it too.
Yeah, I mean, like if you've got a 3090 Ti or 6950 XT, it's like, well, maybe you're not hurting for performance. But for mere mortals who are running, slower cards or previous gen cards, it can be a big deal. So this is, again, you're on a live stream. Quality's gonna suffer from
Yeah.
compression, but if you just look, this is native resolution basically. I mean, you're seeing a 1080p image at 1080p on our stream, hopefully, and you can see, like, you can read Charlie Holland Quinn on the sign there, and you can see the van. If we flip over DLSS quality, going back and forth between those, there's clouds and fog and stuff that swirls around a bit, but DLSS quality, maybe it lost a little bit of detail, hard to say for sure. FSR quality. Now you can see the van in particular, those slightly angled lines on the almost horizontal, but not quite. They look pretty jagged already, and that's in quality mode. DLSS, FSR
Yeah,
1.0.
you can definitely see a difference there.
Yeah, and it's all over, and like if you go to our review and look at things, like there's lots of stuff you'll see, like in the brickwork on the back of the image, the building, the distance. You see details that show up in DLSS and FSR 2.0 that aren't really there as much in native and aren't there in FSR 1.0. FSR 2.0. So 1.0, 2.0. Almost
Big difference.
Yeah, and so let me flip back to native. So there's 2.0, here's native. It's like if you're trying to spot the difference, it's splitting hairs. And here's DLSS again versus FSR 2.0. Like, they're very comparable. And then we've also got DLSS performance, FSR performance. I mean, look how blocky
You can definitely
FSR.
tell with FSR 1.0. You can see
Performance mode at 1080p like this, it was never a good experience in my book. It was something that you only did because you were running a weak ass GPU, and you're like, I can't do more than. Am I allowed to say that, Paul? Sorry.
Not really, but whatever.
It's a kid's show. Weak sauce GPU. There was a stutter in there. And then let's see, FSR 2.0. So 1.0 performance, 2.0 performance. It's like night and day. Here we go again. This is DLSS, FSR. Let's go back to native. So even going to native versus FSR performance, like, it's not a bad loss or change. Again, in motion, native will look better. This is like just sitting still and snapping a screenshot, best case scenario. But if you're struggling to get 60 frames per second, this will definitely help, even at 1080p, and it still looks good. Let's see. Any comments here? So this is the big one, right? GTA 5 and AC Valhalla, I doubt those will see FSR 2.0. I could be wrong, but I doubt it. But I hope Ubisoft and Rockstar and everyone and their dog implements FSR 2.0 and DLSS for that matter. In fact, an interesting thing is NVIDIA at GDC, right? Yeah, the Game Developers Conference. They announced this new software developer kit or whatever called NVIDIA Streamline, and it's open source, and it supports, or it's meant to support, upscalers of all shapes and forms. And they said Intel's already on board with XeSS, NVIDIA's on with DLSS. FSR is open source, so it can be brought on board if someone just does the legwork. Maybe AMD will do it. But with Streamline, basically a game developer just needs to plug into that, and then they go, hey, you want FSR 1.0? It needs your frame data. If you want FSR 2.0 or DLSS, it needs frame data, and it needs motion vectors, and it needs your depth buffer. So,
see, I was reading some online discussion today. A lot of people were really surprised that FSR 2.0 is this good, and I am too. It's amazing. But NVIDIA, they always want to be the best at everything. So maybe this will spur them.
DLSS 3.0.
Yes. But I mean, maybe to make something that's a little bit more open, that isn't going to require some of these proprietary, hoops.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the coming months, because we'll get Intel's Arc, and it has XeSS, Xe Super Sampling, which for all intents and purposes, it sounds like DLSS done by Intel. In fact, Intel hired one of NVIDIA's DLSS developers or creators to help create XeSS, it sounds like. It uses machine learning, supercomputer training, and then it runs on Intel's matrix cores, which are tensor cores, in order to do the upscaling in real time, just like DLSS 2.0. FSR 2.0, meanwhile, it takes the same information, but they say, forget the machine learning. We're just going to code a better algorithm to do this without as much of a performance hit, maybe. And they don't use tensor cores if they exist. They don't use Intel's matrix cores if they exist on the GPU. They just use the shader processors. And so it supports, I mean, AMD says caveats and says, well, it might not run very well on lower tier GPUs. In fact, I've got an RX 480 plugged into my test machine back there. So it's not like the oldest, slowest GPU I have by any means, but I wanted to step back to something relatively old and see how FSR 2.0 works on that and what kind of gains you might see. I've also got a GTX 970 I want to test with it. So I'll run those benchmarks once we're done with the show, and I'll update the article and just kind of say, like, does it actually help? I mean, at 4K, I don't think it even matters if it helps because, you know, let's say it doubles your performance, you're probably going to go from 10 to 20 FPS. Like, it's still not playable. But if you're able to go from 30 to 45 FPS at 1080p or 1440p, that would be awesome. I got someone here. Paul, talk for a minute.
Yeah. So, since the helm has been handed over to me rather quickly, whether or not NVIDIA will come forward with a less expensive open source implementation that remains to be seen. So let's see. Thin peasants on laptops can't wait until. Unfortunately, I do not have control of. I am not even sure if I am online right now. There's Jared. You're on mute.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I had to go. I'm having issues with my house.
That's
I
not
had
good.
I had a guy come by to fix my air conditioning today. The condenser and fan just starting it up, and he's like, "Yeah, it's getting no power out there." So he's been here for like 3 hours poking at it and can't figure it out. So anyway, back to what we were talking about. Sorry for that, abandoning you, Paul.
Yeah. I couldn't figure out how to run the interface. I was going to start taking questions, but I couldn't.
Yes. All right. Yeah, you have to be the host to run the interface. But all right. So let's see. I guess one of my big things is this is FSR has been AMD's most popular. What do you want to call it? Library or SDK that they've ever created. They said, like, it's had massive uptake. I think it's in like 60 games, or I don't know what the number is, but it's in a lot of games. And they've said, yeah, we've had tons of developer interest. And part of it was universal. Works on Intel integrated graphics, works on NVIDIA, works on AMD. You know, DLSS, you have to have an RTX card. So it's inherently limiting. Well,
Correct.
FSR 2.0 still supposed to be universal, but the demands are higher, which we'll get to in just a second here. And the net result is, you know, where FSR saw a lot of uptake, and all you needed to do to work with FSR 1.0 was toss it your frame buffer. Whereas FSR 2.0, now you've got to send it your depth buffer and motion vectors as well as the frame buffers. So it requires more work, and some games, like if a game has temporal AA implemented, it should be pretty easy. I mean, in my mind, FSR 2.0 is really temporal AA done better. It's because
Yeah.
temporal AA adds a lot of blurriness, and AMD already did FidelityFX contrast aware sharpening (CAS), and like games that support that, I'm like, actually that's nice because it takes some of the crappiness of TAA and sharpens it and looks better. Well, this is like, hey, let's take TAA and let's take CAS and let's take some of this other upscaling technology and let's combine them all into one algorithm. And instead of running, TAA, then CAS, then upscale, let's just do it all in one universal shader, and hopefully, performance improves and quality improves and it can be adopted by more game companies. But we have to see now. So
Yeah, absolutely.
NVIDIA's got like, I don't know, 140 or something games and applications have now added DLSS support. It's become pretty easy to add. FSR, it's, I think, less than half that many, but growing. FSR 2.0, though, you look at it and you go, well, gosh, you combine that with the dynamic resolution support, which is in both DLSS and FSR 2. I think only a few games support the dynamic modes right now, but it will probably grow. And you go, man, this is pretty slick. I mean, you can take a card that legitimately struggles at 4K, turn it into a 4K gaming card with little loss of quality. Comments here, as DLSS is open source. It's not open source though, unless I missed something. So yeah, AMD stuff is open source. That's the big advantage. Developers can implement it without having to be tied to NVIDIA, I guess you would say. If only DLSS and FSR 2.0 could be implemented at the driver level. So that's a nice thought, right? But the difficulty with driver level things is they don't have access to the game's internal data, which is what DLSS and FSR 2.0 need. They need depth buffers, they need motion vectors, and the frame data is all the driver really has access to. And so that's why, you can't really do it at a driver level as far as I know. Maybe there's some hack someone will figure out. But yeah, it's going to be interesting because I don't think DLS is going to go away anytime soon.
I don't either. No.
And it uses tensor cores, which FSR doesn't. Intel's making XeSS, which uses their tensor cores, their matrix cores. And I'm kind of like, well, Intel should have just teamed up with AMD and said, hey, let's make something better than DLSS and combine our power. But maybe Intel wants to take down NVIDIA down the road, and so they think they have to go solo. All right, let's go ahead and flip to the benchmarks. So I only tested on 2 cards, and I intentionally chose not the craziest high-end card. So I'm not testing on a 3090 Ti. I'm not testing on 6950 XT. I tested on the 6700 XT and the 3070. So still fast cards, but with Deathloop, it supports ray tracing. I did enable ray tracing. I didn't want to do that one first. Sorry. There. I want to start at 1080p. My slides are out of order. So I enabled ray tracing. It's at maxed out settings, and native mode has TAA enabled as well as FidelityFX CAS, and then it got a sharpening factor of 10 set. I thought that looked best in my impressions anyway. So you can see on 6700 XT, it goes from 110 frames per second to, with FSR quality, the 1.0, it gained like almost 40%, and it gained like over 50%, I think, at performance mode, right? Mm-hmm. But as I showed in the image quality, the actual quality of FSR 1.0 performance was terrible.
Yeah, so it's not worth it. I mean, well, it is. Well,
not at 1080p, it's certainly not. So then we flip over to FSR 2.0, and you go, okay, less gains, like it's maybe 10% slower. Yeah, about 10% slower than FSR 1.0 in quality mode. In performance mode, though, it was actually faster than FSR 1.0 quality, looked better. Overall, it's a win-win thing where I'm like, yeah, if you previously were thinking I need to use FSR 1.0 quality mode, that gives me enough frame rates, but it doesn't kill image quality. Now you can get better quality with the 2.0 performance mode. And there's a balanced mode that would land in between these, basically. The thing is, though, this is CPU limited because, well, it's starting to become CPU limited because if we flip over to the 3070, you can see that, like, native was 128 frames per second. The highest performance was actually FSR quality mode, but basically it was tied with FSR 1.0 performance mode, and everything was within like 3 or 4%, regardless of mode. So, like, the 3070 was fast enough at 1080p, probably because of its superior ray tracing hardware, that it didn't really need any of these upscaling algorithms to get 120 frames per second. So then let's go ahead and go to 4K. Separate the wannabes from the beefy graphics cards. So 6700 XT this time, we're looking at 35 frames per second. FSR 1.0 quality almost doubled that to 60 frames per second, 61 frames per second, but minimums still falling, into the 40s. And then performance mode averages up to 80. Minimums are still 52, so it's like, yeah, you'll see a little bit of like that choppiness when you drop below 60, if you're sensitive to that. But overall, it was pretty smooth. 2.0 quality ends up like slower than 1.0 quality, but faster than native and looks a lot better. And then the in between is like FSR 2.0 performance looks better than FSR 1.0 quality, but runs about 10% faster. So all in all, those are good things. Again, it's just in Deathloop. I can't speak to how this affects Back 4 Blood or, Red Dead Redemption 2 or any of these other games that could support FSR 2.0. Like, they all have their own engines and such. But in general, I think a game that implements it properly could see some really nice performance gains without compromising too much on image quality. The 3070, you can see this time there's big gains across the board with all of the different modes, and you go from 36 frames per second. So this is worth noting, like performance 35 on the AMD card, 36 on the NVIDIA card at native, so basically equivalent performance. If you look at FSR 1.0, AMD gets a little higher gains. They got up to 61 and 80 versus the NVIDIA card goes up to 58 and 74. But if you look at the 2.0, I'll flip back again. So we go from 51 and 68 to 52 and 67, meaning AMD versus NVIDIA GPUs, at least when we're looking at RDNA 2 and Ampere GPUs, they got similar gains from FSR. DLSS meanwhile was like it's slower in quality mode. Well, it's tied with FSR 2.0 in quality mode, but it's faster in performance mode. I probably need to do more testing to actually decide, like, does DLSS performance mode actually look better than FSR 2.0 performance mode, or do they look similar in motion and such? So that's something I need to look at. But it looks like if you've got a modern RTX card and you're running at 4K in performance mode, you might still be best off running DLSS. And probably that's because, you've got inputs of 1080p frame buffers, 1080p depth buffers, 1080p motion vectors.
Yeah.
And that's where that Tensor Core hardware can actually process a lot of data pretty fast. And so that's perhaps why they're getting that boost. I think that's...
Yeah, they have purpose-built, well, not purpose-built, but they have essentially hardware acceleration for those tasks. So,
yeah,
that is an advantage for DLSS, but then it locks you into, you have to have the hardware.
Yeah, you have to have NVIDIA hardware. So, if you have an NVIDIA card and a game supports both FSR2 and DLSS, you can choose, and you might end up choosing DLSS. Most games right now only support DLSS or maybe FSR1, so there are your options. Like, quality-wise, DLSS easily wins out. If you just want the frame rates, maybe FSR is worth doing in those cases. Going forward, though, we'll get a lot of these FSR 2 games, and hopefully that will look better, or that will, what do you want to say, make things more useful. Gosh, can I do this? I actually want to show AMD's stuff on this. I forgot to put these in my slide deck. So let me see if I can share. I'm going to take my slides out and share screen. Yeah, let's see if this works. Yeah, excellent. Can you guys see that?
I can. Yeah.
Okay, so this is AMD's slide deck that they showed to us on FSR 2.0, and they're showing, this is on a 6950 XT, 4K going from 44 to 100 frames per second. Their key points: better than native image quality using temporal data, and includes optimized anti-aliasing. So like I said, it basically replaces temporal AA and CAS and upscaling and wraps it all into one shader algorithm. Higher image quality than FSR 1.0 at all quality presets and resolutions. I do not dispute that at all. My impressions of their image quality versus 1.0 were greatly improved, but that is using perhaps the worst implementation of FSR 1 that was available. And then it doesn't require dedicated machine learning hardware, and it can boost frame rates in supported games across a wide range of products. Here's what we were talking about. So if you were talking about 1.0, it only took this bottom frame in the bottom left. It only took the rendered resolution colored data, and it had to use spatial upscaling to try and enhance that and make it look better. And so it ended up kind of sharpening some things, but it wasn't ideal. You add in motion vectors that are calculated based on what's happening in the game engine, and then you add in the depth buffers, and you can get, you're talking about a lot more data. So, if you think about resolutions, 4K is 4 times the pixels of 1080p. But now imagine taking 1080p, and you're taking a 1080p depth buffer, 1080p motion vectors, and like 3 or 4 frames of 1080p data. Now you've got 6 times 1080p that you're using with their algorithm to try and create a final rendered output. And they showed, again, you're looking at a video, so the image quality comparisons probably are meaningless, but 73 with max settings, FSR off to 121 with performance mode, and then they showed, quality and balanced mode kind of offer these in betweens. And then this was the slide I wanted to show. So right now it's in Deathloop. We've got upcoming games that will implement FSR 2.0, including Flight Simulator, which I believe is also going to implement DLSS, I've heard. Unknown Awakening, Farming Simulator 2022, that's Paul's favorite game.
Yes.
EVE Online. So, I mean, some of these I'm like, Perfect World Remake, Swordsman Remake, I've never even heard of those. Forspoken, that's actually a game I've heard of. It seems to be like a pretty big one that's coming out. And, game developers, a fair number of them have already said, yeah, we're going to support this. I would assume, like, realistically, anyone who supported FSR 1.0 is going to be on board with supporting FSR 2.0. And that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing AMD slides now and go back to our thing. I have no idea what that looked like since I was staring at the slide deck, but all right, questions. Yeah, questions. Let's see. No, that one we already looked at. Sorry. Oh. If only let's see. Yeah, I don't see. They're not going to get rid of it. DLSS is here to stay. Kind of like G-Sync, right?
Yeah, and there's always a catch with NVIDIA. Like they just announced, and everybody made this big deal about how NVIDIA was open sourcing their GPU drivers. But if you do your homework and you look into it, it turns out that the Linux drivers actually aren't fully open. They just open source the they open source the firmware that calls the driver, but the driver blobs are still proprietary. So some people in the Linux community are kind of saying, well, that was halfway, but
yeah, they're getting there, but they're not going there all the way. They're not all in. And the other thing with their open sourcing drivers for Linux, those are focused on data center drivers. They even said multiple times, like, we feel like the data center support is in a release quality level, but that the consumer hardware is an alpha level. And it's like, oh, well, we care about the consumer stuff. The people paying big money for supercomputers, like the Department of Energy and things of that nature, they're the ones who wanted those open source drivers. And so they're probably the ones who push that through more than anything, is my guess. But yeah. Someone asked here, didn't Intel say that non-tensor cards could use a version of their XeSS software? Yes. So XeSS will have 2 modes of operation. And like in my mind, I'm hoping there's a third mode, but mode 1 is if you have an Intel Arc GPU with the Xe matrix cores, XMX cores, then it will use those. Those are basically tensor cores. I don't know if it's using like int8 or FP8 or FP16 mode on those cores, but it's using like one of those faster math operating modes, so it's not using the precision of FP32. If you don't have those Xe matrix cores, then it will use DP4A support, which is, I believe, int8. It's 4-bit integers, right, Paul?
Yes, and that is widely supported. But the problem,
well, it's not
always
super
the problems.
Huh? It's supported from Pascal and later, and AMD RDNA and later GPUs. So, if you got a Polaris GPU, it's not supported. It's not supported on Vega. It's not supported on Maxwell. But Maxwell's like.
But there's a dirty secret there too, and that is that Intel is not working on that one first. They're pushing XMX first, their proprietary version first, and they said, well, we'll do DP4A. We'll do it. But when
we'll do it. We don't know how fast it will be. We don't know if it will be the same image quality. We don't know a lot of things. And this is
why
I
don't
said
know when it will come.
Yeah.
So
I said I hope there's a third mode where they will support NVIDIA's tensor cores as well, but why would Intel do that? NVIDIA that favor. I wish they would, but I
don't think that NVIDIA is going to do Intel the favor of maybe giving them I'm sure Intel could figure it out. But in either case, it's promising what they promised, but then again, the details are kind of like,
devil's in the details as always.
Yes.
So we hope XeSS turns out good. I mean, I
think it'll be good tech.
XeSS is it's worse than FSR in terms of developer support right now.
Intel has a mountain to climb to even get their drivers and discrete cards out. So
yeah, I mean, have you noticed that the Intel Arc GPUs keep on being pushed back? I mean,
yes.
Their VP of the visual compute products, Lisa Pierce, she had this blog post last week, or was it this week? Anyway, it pretty much was I mean, I hate to throw her under the bus like this, but it was so transparent to me. I'm like, these aren't being delayed because they're so awesome and so fast and everything's working well. It's like they've got driver problems and software support problems, and the hardware's not rolling out fast enough. They're like, oh yeah, there's supply shortages and whatnot. But I'm like, yeah, I think everyone who has looked at the hardware is not excited about it. Meaning the big
OEMs.
Yeah, they're looking at it going, why should I put in an Intel Arc GPU that's slower than an NVIDIA GPU for my laptop? And so, Lisa Pierce's blog was like, yeah, they're going to be in a lot of laptops in China, and we're going to have desktop cards in China for system builders first. I'm like, that
That's
sounds like
like
they're pulling way back.
That sounds like Cannon Lake.
Yeah, Cannon
That
Lake.
is exactly what they did with Cannon Lake. Their first 10 nanometer chip that was built on a process that they ended up killing.
Yeah.
Wasn't even fully functional. They hid it in China and they released it there so they could make good on their promise to their investors.
Yeah, they said we released it, and so that they could get their executive bonuses and say we are on track. I mean, like
for the shareholders, yeah, for SEC rules, if you say you do something like that or you're going to, you have to, but you don't have to. You could be tricky, and that's what they did. And I really hope that that's not what we're seeing here. That this is legitimate, just a delay. But I don't understand. They're like, well, it'll be easier to supply them in China because of the supply chain. Yeah, but the ships still come here, and there's still a lot of planes that fly over here.
It feels like the China thing is like maybe cheap products in China and consumers aren't as worried about an RTX card or a high-end AMD card, that they're like, oh yeah, we'll use Intel. We just wanted to. I don't know. Like,
might make it a little bit harder to get reviews over here in the US too.
Yeah, like I can pretty much guarantee you, we're not getting an Intel Arc GPU sent to us anytime soon until like they're widely available, over in China and people have bought them for a couple of months.
Exactly.
All right. Let's see.
Speculation.
Yes. So Sora says, FSR 2 doesn't seem to give as many frames, but there's less shimmering, so that's one for me. Yeah, and that was kind of the thing. FSR 1.0 was so simple in that it only needed spatial information, like your current frame, in order to try and upscale, that it could run fast, and so it could boost performance even on slow cards and even on fast cards, running at, you're rendering at 960 by 540 instead of 1080p, for example. And it's like, oh, that's a lot less data to move around. As long as you're not CPU limited, FSR 1 could boost your frame rates. But the problem was it just didn't look great doing it. You could run at ultra quality mode, which was like 1.2 upscaling factor, I think, something like that. It was relatively, it's like, well, you could do that with your AMD and NVIDIA drivers where you go, hey, you know what? When I say 1080p, I actually want to run at 1768 by whatever, 80% of 1080p, and I want you to upscale it. You can try and do those tricks. So, yeah, it's a compromise in performance and quality with an emphasis now more on quality, whereas the initial FSR was more about performance. Let's see, someone else. This is why people want Intel to finally launch their GPUs already. I mean, like, I want to see them. I tested DG1 last year. DG1 was not great.
Intel just couldn't. They couldn't have worse luck. I mean, look, Intel's GPU 6 months ago would have been a win for everybody. I mean, if for them, for people, for users, it wouldn't matter how slow they were. It's kind of like, okay, everybody complains about the 6500 XT. Yes, it's terrible. But there are a lot of people who have a GPU that otherwise would not have had a GPU because of that trash GPU. But you'd probably be able to say that a lot of the same if Intel had been able to get their GPUs out 6 months ago. There'd be a lot of folks with GPUs that otherwise wouldn't have them. But man, they had a nice big runway before AMD and Intel or AMD and NVIDIA start firing at each other with these new GPUs. I mean, 6 months changes everything. If you're not competitive 6 months ago, it's a whole different ballgame than it is today. Now you're on the cusp of these big releases, or we just had a release from AMD. Everybody in the world knows that NVIDIA is coming. And now crypto's crashed. So, I mean, you could go buy give it a month, give it 2 months. You're going to be able to buy used cards at an embarrassment of riches. You're going to be able to get amazing. Yes, we hope. we should see a flood of used cards if this goes down like it did the last time. A flood of used cards to where you could get, a previous gen cards at great deals.
For a song. I mean, like,
for nothing. And they'll be better than the best of the Intel cards. So there's no demand. It's even worse because you'll be able to go buy cheap used cards that'll beat the pants off of any Intel thing with no driver. Well, only, it depends. They have some driver issues, but not XE class driver issues.
So this is something like I've been talking about this for like, it feels like forever, because like this crypto bubble, like it was a bubble. Everyone knew it was a bubble. And yet you had these investors and shady characters that were like, no, it's never going to pop. It's just going to go up forever. I'm like, whatever. So 2017, we had a bubble and it hit like Bitcoin hit $19,000 and you couldn't buy any of the GPUs, which in that time frame was Pascal and Vega and Polaris. Like they were all sold out. They were going on eBay for double their normal price or triple. People were upset. That bubble didn't last as long, probably because there wasn't a pandemic going on at the same time. But the interesting thing is AMD cranked up production eventually. Like there's a delay. Like if AMD or NVIDIA says right now, you know what we need tons more graphics cards, and they push through with TSMC or Samsung or whoever, and they say make us
like
more
a
GPUs.
train.
It takes 4 to 6 months. So AMD did that last time, and you know what the result was? They all of a sudden got a crap ton of Polaris 20 GPUs, which were the RX 570, RX 580. They just got lots of them. And then all of a sudden, that demand from crypto evaporated. No one was buying them. And so the 570 was selling for $120 for like a year. And the 560, which was half as fast, was supposed to be $110, and so like they killed their budget card. They couldn't sell 560s. They had this huge inventory of 570s, and the 570s didn't even sell out until the 2020 crypto bubble came along. And
NVIDIA got punished.
Hey, we'll buy them.
NVIDIA got punished just last week.
Too.
They had to pay out a fine to the SEC. Now, the fine's a joke. $5.5 million fine is literally nothing to Jensen. But, they had to pay it out because of the fallout. They lost tons of money, too. They were oversupplied. But here's the thing. This time, my prediction is that the oversupply that we saw at the tail end of the last one is child's play compared to what we're going to see with this one, because TSMC has made these crazy rules about wafer pre-allocations. They're having to buy them further in advance for the last year and a half than in history, like placing orders 8 and 12 months ahead. So they have mentioned this in their earnings calls to where they're placing them outside of their visibility. They don't really know what the market's going to be doing, but TSMC is demanding it because they can make demands, and they want guaranteed wafer allocations.
But
so
they can change what they're using those wafers on, right?
They have this huge start. Hold on. They have this huge start, and it's like a train. You can't just slam on the brakes. It's going to take like 5 miles or a mile to stop. But this time it's going to take them like 5 miles to stop. I think AMD is going to have a flood of. That's my opinion.
And
I think the oversupply is real.
Yeah. Yep. So can they change what those wafers are used for?
That I'm not entirely clear about.
Like, so if AMD says, hey, if AMD says, hey, we need, 30,000 Navi 21 wafers, and all of a sudden the market falls out, can they say, hey, we've got these supercomputer customers who want Alderon, so let's make those instead? Like, if they could do that, it's not quite as painful.
So some of it is they would have to be on the same node, but you're looking at a different number of process steps for different types of chips. And some of these process steps, some of these chips have 1,000 process steps. It's crazy the number of process steps. I actually have this graphic here that I can't share, but if I could, I would show it to you.
Can't you hit the share screen?
I'm trying to find it. It's just about process steps. The number of process steps has increased to a point where is this? Man, this is.
Let me take this while you're talking about that. Do you think
it's mind blowing? Okay, but for instance, just as a general indication, if each process step, there are so many process steps in manufacturing of any semiconductor device that if the yield on each process step is 99.5%, 99.5% of the time it's going to be perfect. If that's your yield rate for one step, less than 1% of devices will work. Your yield, your rate on your error for margin is 99.99999 per step, and they can take hundreds of steps. So when they switch and they're making these decisions about fab allocation, a thing called machine cycle time comes into play here. And they have to make sure that the machines are busy at certain times. And they're running all these different things. It's not just they're building just this. So how much they can switch, I think, is limited. This is a long way of saying that's a very complex thing.
So GPU prices,
they're stuck to some extent. Yes, to some extent.
There's a reason they're coming down. There's a reason they're falling, and we think they're going to fall further. It's going to be interesting. Like theoretically, I mean, depending on what they've got in their pipe, like NVIDIA is usually pretty smart about these things, but like you said, they had to go to TSMC. They had to order things 8 to 12 months in advance. Will Ada come out in September, or will it be pushed back because they've got a glut of Ampere GPUs that are no longer sold? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But when you look at the falling prices, and that's funny because there's a lot of these retailers that are pushing deals now, and they're trying to make a lot of fanfare and sell cards as fast as they can at still slightly inflated prices because they all see it. They all say, oh my gosh, in 3 months, these cards are going to be worthless. Not worthless, but they're going to be cards we paid $500 for that we can't sell for $400.
And AMD and NVIDIA see it. And I'll tell you, AMD is shocked. I think that, I believe that AMD is shocked. Look at their Raise the Game bundle that they just released. They don't even have a list of games for it. It feels like they're like, oh my gosh, like we need to do something because these cards aren't selling and they're in stock everywhere. And, like you just look at it, it's weird. I was reading about this today, some conversations about this. They're like, this feels like they're like caught with their pants down and they need to do something to move units.
Right? Well, I mean, this whole refresh from AMD that just happened, like, it's weird. I mean, a slightly overclocked 6900 XT with faster memory. That's what the 6950 is. And that's what the 6750 is and the 6650. And, the difference in a lot of cases is like 5%. I'm like, well, that's a factory overclocked card. Did they release these right now? I think, hey, we create new SKUs, we give them different memory, and we promote them, and we hope to sell off a bunch of RDNA 2 GPUs that we are worried we're going to be stuck with. NVIDIA's 3090 Ti was also kind of weird. It's like, did we really need, a year and a half later, a 3090 Ti that increased power use by almost 50% and increased performance by 10%? Like, I don't think so, but they did it. I almost feel like 3090 Ti was paving the way for Ada in terms of like, hey, we're getting you ready for higher power draws and GDDR6X 21 gigabits per second memory as standard, and maybe faster memory on higher spec cards. Lots of stuff happening. And yeah, Intel, them being late with ARC, like,
it's just
this is the worst timing for
it's
them.
The worst of everything. It's the worst of everything. I'm sorry, I can't.
6 months ago,
every single card that they needed to be played, they didn't get a single one.
6 months ago, if ARC, their top end ARC, had come out and delivered even 36 performance, and they said, but we'll sell it to you for $600, they could have sold cards. Yep. If it delivered 3070 performance and they sold it for $600, people would have been ecstatic.
Yeah, if it
in 3 more months. Or miners would have bought it if it could mine.
If it could even mine, they have a guaranteed market. There's no risk.
Yeah, so
now what are
now,
they doing? They're selling
2-3 months from now, if it delivers 3070 performance, a $500 card, that's probably going to be selling for under $500. And they're like, what do we sell it for? and you get worse drivers, and mining doesn't matter anymore. It's going to be, it could be really bad.
Yeah, they're going to have to subsidize these OEMs heavily and put it in cheap, low-end machines, and they're going to have to give them package deals. You know,
It's
you buy
really
our
good
CPU,
at AV1 encoding.
you buy our CPU, you buy our chipset, you buy our GPU. You know the deal. We'll give you this.
And it's why they're pushing laptops too, because laptops, it's like it does make more sense there, because they're like, hey, we can focus on the whole system and power draw and stuff, and maybe optimize it more.
But NVIDIA and AMD are doing the same thing. So,
yeah.
Well, NVIDIA not as much, but AMD definitely.
All right, let's see. Few questions. Do you think DLSS 3.0 is vaporware? I'm like, well, NVIDIA from the start has been saying what? Our machine learning algorithms improve over time, and we regularly release updates and they get better and blah, blah, blah. And they're going to keep doing that. Like, what made 2.0 different from 1.0 is they switched from spatial to temporal upscaling. And 1.0 kind of sucked, just like FSR 1.0 kind of sucks. But 2.0 was great. And from 2.0 on, they've just added little things to improve it and make it better. And what would 3.0 add to the party? I'm not even sure.
But here's the thing: will 3.0 exist?
Yeah,
is it vaporware? No, I think it'll exist.
They've never announced it, so
they're happy. Yeah, they're happy to put a 3.0 on anything. They're happy to make even a 4.0 or 5.0. Is it going to be worth? Does it earn the new revision number? Should it be more like a 2.1? Well,
we're
it might be 2.1 with 3.0 branding. What?
We're up to 2.3 already, so
yeah. Or excuse me,
should it be a 2.5?
Yeah, should it be a 2.6 or something? That we'll have to see. But I mean, will NVIDIA keep on keeping on with DLSS? I'd bet a lot of money on that. I would bet Jared's next paycheck that they will continue.
That's a lot of not that much money. Paul makes way more than me.
No.
He's my manager. Comment from Sora. 280 is still looking great today, so half-baked software and Dell will be getting their cards could look bad compared to what is in the market at the moment. Yes. I mean,
yes.
A 2080 is basically, it's not as fast as a 3070, but it's faster than a 3060. And that's like right where we expect ARC to land.
Hey, I'm going to tell you, man, 2080s are good stuff. I've got a few of them sitting right here. A 2080 will get you around on a lot of games.
Yeah.
If
you're not trying to insist on 4K at maxed out settings, like 2080 is still fast. I mean, like I talk to people and they're like, "Oh, my 2070s." I'll make fun of Sarah here. Our coworker was like, my 2070 Super is feeling long in the tooth." I'm like, there's a lot of people that would be really happy to have a 2070 Super.
Yeah. I got a couple of these. Hold on.
Next year, it's a new Navi and also 40 series. I don't think that's next year. That's this
year.
It's a
TI. It's a TI.
That's Paul's test card before he got the 3090.
Do what?
Like we expect.
Look, that's a good card right there. That'll get you around for a while. I mean, this is a good card for a few years. You're about to be able to get these things really cheap.
Yeah, I think those are going to drop into like $300 range soon on eBay. Mined heavily. Hope they work still. So RDNA 3 and RTX 40, they're both supposed to come this year. Like that's been AMD's message is RDNA 3 is still coming in 2022. NVIDIA hasn't specifically said Ada and RTX 40 are coming in 2022, but that is definitely the expectation. So, they're all like Intel, AMD, and NVIDIA this fall are slated to launch their next-gen GPUs. EVGA finally fulfilled my Q order. They wanted a 670 for 3070 vanilla. I'm like, are you serious? You know what? I know someone who got a 3080 FTW3 Ultra, and that was 2 months ago, maybe. They were so excited to finally get that option, and they're like, "Oh, but it's $1,000." And they said, "Should I get it?" I'm like, "It's still a good card for $1,000, but it's not like it's supposed to be a $700, $800 card." This is what I'm talking about. Like, EVGA is one of those. They are pushing all those Q things. They're like, "Please buy them fast before the bottom falls out." So if you buy it, just know that you're probably going to look back in 2 months and go, wow, I spent $200 more than I needed to.
Let's see how bad
And
it is today. What's Ethereum's price right now?
oh, Ethereum
1939. Ouch.
That's like the first time below $2,000 in
Wow.
over a year, right?
Longer than a year, yeah.
Yeah, and what's Bitcoin at? Bitcoin is sitting at a lovely 28,000. So yeah,
July of 21. So yeah.
Oh yeah. Yep. So cryptocurrency is not going to prop up graphics card prices, and if you bought a card for mining, or if you built a mining farm, if you've broken even or almost broken even on mining right now, you might be going, you know what? As an idea, you spend $1 million on your mining farm, you've made almost $1 million back. If you can sell all that hardware for $500,000, you still come out 50% ahead.
Correct, and you're not rolling the dice on proof of stake.
Or potentially you spent 2 million, 10 million, whatever these big guys did, and maybe you even more than made back your money, and now you're like, hey, you know what? Rather than fighting with, power costs and all this other stuff, right now, if you're mining, let's see, what's NiceHash say?
Well, see, that's the thing too, is the price of power is going up as well. So
Yeah.
Especially over in Europe.
So NiceHash is estimating that if you have a tuned 3080 Ti or 3090, now NiceHash actually recently figured out how to fully unlock NVIDIA's LHR limiter. So now you're getting the full 120 mega hash on a 3080 Ti, or you're getting the 95 on a 3080. A 3080 is only making $2.23 per day, and that's going down, right? So these are, you're talking about like for $1,000, that's 400 days to break even at current rates. The merge comes in, everything falls apart. Okay, we've beat that horse. It's don't overpay for a GPU right now. FSR 2.0 is impressive. I like it. I want to see it in more games though. I want to see it in a lot more games. And like I've got a sample size of one, Deathloop FSR versus DLSS, and so I want to see all those over there FSR games get 2.0 support, and then see how that actually stacks up.
I think the biggest thing here is it's really good to see AMD being competitive in this area and giving NVIDIA a reason to remain competitive as well. We've seen what the one horse races do to this market quite a bit. And then when the horses change, we see that they're the same horse. Everybody, you can say that, they're all going to do the same thing to you. So we don't need any one company to be ahead. We need everybody to fight. It's good to see them fighting.
Yeah. And I hope Intel, even though I don't expect ARC to be awesome at this stage, I hope that while Alchemist is late to the party and is likely going to fall short, I really hope that their Battle Mage and Celestial and Druid architectures, that they iterate and improve and get more timely with their launches, because I would love to see this become a 3-horse race between AMD and NVIDIA
fantastic. Yes.
Intel. So last big question. This is important. Ti or Ti? The only person who really says Ti that I'm aware of is Fisher at NVIDIA. He was like, the 3090 Ti, 3080 Ti.
When I'm in Computex, I hear a lot of them say Ti. A lot of folks
they're mimicking Fisher. Fisher started it. Everyone at NVIDIA always used to say Ti, and then all of a sudden Fisher started going Ti. And I'm like, okay. Anyway, I say Ti. I'm going to keep saying Ti. But I also say GIF. I do not say GIF, even though it's supposed to be after Jiffy Simple. I refuse. It's GIF. It's pronounced GIF.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like tomato. What is that? What is that drink we were talking about yesterday called?
The Pepsi. I don't.
Dr. Pepper drink.
Horchata.
Yeah, it could be mochado, or
yes.
Mochata. I don't know. Anyway,
horchata is different than mochata. I don't know.
Yes.
All right,
I'm
guys.
Just saying there's a million ways to pronounce it.
We're all good. We will be back next week. I'm not sure what we'll be talking about for sure. Maybe we'll dig into more GPU nonsense. Maybe we'll have Paul come with some hot news from the processor side of the world. Thanks for joining us. Like and subscribe, share with all your friends, and don't buy a GPU unless you just really, really want to and you don't care if you overspend. See you next time.